Well, welcome everyone. I'm so excited for today. Thank you all I've got about 50 people joining me live on Zoom, live remotely, of course, on Zoom for this to get a little bit of interaction and questions and comments and stuff. But anyway, I am Sarah Cambridge. I am a researcher with 10 years experience in both consulting and in person or in-house research. And I'm offering this presentation today where I'm going to be presenting two of my own case studies for my actual job interviews, one from very early in my career and one from more recently. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my framing for this, but really the point is that I know that the market is really tough and that it's so challenging to know how to build a case study, especially when you're newer to the field. And there's just a dearth of examples live examples of how to do it. It's one thing to kind of learn about how to create a case study for the web, but building it in person is a whole nother thing, and presenting it in person is a whole nother thing. So my hope is that you will see something you can do differently in your case studies, wherever level you're at. Every case study is going to be, a good case study, I think, is really going to have that person's personality and, of course, be super informed by the scope of how the project went, what happened, who the stakeholders were, so many things that are going to change it. But anyway, I hope that whatever I present today gives you maybe a new way to see your own case studies, help you unlock something you've been struggling with or how to approach it. And so the agenda for today is I am going to have two case studies that I'm going to present. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, kind of talk a little bit about case studies, my approach with case studies, and then I'm going to each case study is going to be about 20 minutes. For the people who are joining this Zoom live, I'm going to invite you to think about, while you're hearing the case study, kind of what's surprising or interesting to you about it, or how is it different than what you would have thought. If you have any questions, to post that in the chat between case studies. I'll talk about those a little bit. But then after the second case study, then I'll have more of an open Q&A where I'll go through the chat and read the comments and maybe have some time for people to ask live questions. So I also want to frame my approach before I dive in. So I had my own, when I got out of grad school, I spent 2 years at a small research consultancy. And when I wanted to go in-house, it took a year for me to find that job. And it was 15 interviews. And I just really struggled. I kept getting no, and I was like, what's going on? So I kept just figuring out how to hack and review my progress, like what happened, debriefing with friends, and started getting clues about what to look for that went well and improving my case studies. And so when I landed at after that 15 interviews, the only job offer I got was at Google. So I ended up at material design at Google, which was a great fit for me. But I ended up writing a blog post called 15 Interviews to Google, which was kind of some of my learnings on that job search. So if you want to kind of hear that story, you can look up 15 Interviews to Google. Anyway, that led to me teaching a storytelling class at my alma mater at the School of Information at Berkeley, which I built the class and taught for 5 years. So I worked with a lot of different students looking to get into UX, helping them kind of take a project that they had worked on, turn it into a web case study, and then turning it into a presentation. And I would have UX professionals come critiquing, and on top of my own feedback, I would have guest lecturers talking about what they look for in a case study. I'd also be interviewing hiring managers every year to hear what they were looking for. So my own approach was very much framed by my learnings as I did this class. And so that's a little bit what you're hearing, in kind of some of this early stuff. I do want to kind of talk about what makes, as I've been noodling on this, I've been thinking, like, why is it so hard to make a good case study? And there's a few things that are really contribute to it. First is that, when you think about a project that you worked on, even if it was just a 2-week project, you think about the level of complexity of that 2-week project. And to take all of the stuff and all of the decisions that got made and all the ways the project pivoted and turn that into a case study is, like something you could tell in 10 or 15 or 20 minutes. that is one level of challenge, but it's also you're reframing it. A project itself is really, when you're working with a stakeholder or client, you're really working with, you both have this shared understanding, you have the shared goal, and the outcome, the thing that you're focused on is whatever the deliverables are, whether they're designs, if you're a designer, or research findings and recommendations, if you're a researcher. But for a case study, for a job interview, it's got to be about your contributions. It's got to be your hero story about how you led the project, how you framed it, how you contributed to moving it forward. So that's a very different approach. And then finally, one thing that I really try to do with my case studies is to highlight a path. Like, it's so hard to simplify. And it's like, what is that key single story that I want to tell in here? So you want to kind of remove so much of that detail, and that's all very painful. So those are a few things that make building a case study for a job interview so challenging. And then the top tips I wanted to give before I dive into my case study for improving your case study. And again, this is from all my years of teaching and helping a lot of students work through many levels of drafts and case studies and get to where they could present something and use it for job interviews, is the first thing I saw people to do is wanting to noodle on it in their own head privately for weeks and months at a time. And you've got to get out of your head. You've got the most efficient way to move your case study forward is to be getting feedback from real people, as every few weeks when you're working on it. Like, don't noodle in your head because you know every detail and you don't know what's going to be confusing or helpful for other people. So the more feedback you're getting from people over time, the more helpful it's going to be. And okay, yeah, I see somebody just posted that Google that link to my let's see. Okay, hang on a second. Let me pause here. Okay, I'm back. So that what I was just saying is that the big thing is to get feedback from other people as you work on your case study. Also to practice, saying it out loud, going through the whole thing several times. I usually record myself when I'm getting ready for a case study, and I'll watch it and I'll kind of look for opportunities to make it better. But the more times that you have repeated it, the more comfortable, the more it's in your head, the more comfortable you're going to be when you're presenting it in person. So that's a big piece of it too. And then the things to do to keep looking for ways to make it better as you're going forward is to just keep refining it between interviews, meaning like, where's the jargon, where it may be confusing for people who weren't part of the original team. How can I simplify the story? What extraneous detail is in there? And just to make sure that your contributions are clear, like, is my hero story really clear here? So those are some of the things you can top tips for improving your case studies. And so, yeah, let me get started. All right, so I'm going to present now like I'm actually in an interview. So hi everyone. I am very excited to be here today to present my case study to you. I'm Sarah Cambridge. I'm a researcher. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I was actually a graphic designer for a long time. I did a lot of print and identity work, and it was kind of getting out of school right when web started to become a big thing, and started moving into web gradually over time, and got really excited about the opportunities to do different things in the digital space. And when I learned about the field of user experience, I really started thinking seriously about pivoting my career into that space from traditional print design. And that was sped along by the 2008 economic downturn, which led me to go to grad school and thinking I could come out. I went to the School of Information at Berkeley and was thinking I would come out a web designer. But I got so excited when I learned in my first semester in grad school that research is its own field. User experience research was really emerging at that time as a separate field. And my first major in college had been anthropology. So it was really like a big loop for me of coming back to my fascination with human behavior and how unique people see things, how uniquely people see things. So I moved into research in grad school. And then my first job out of grad school is this research consultancy I've been working at. So I've been here for a couple of years. And one of the great things about starting a career as a consultant is that you could just get exposed to so many different methods and types of projects. So this is a little bit about my method toolkit. I've just so many different kinds of interviews I've been able to conduct for the different projects I've worked on. Contextual interviews, street interviews, in lab interviews for more tactical work. And right now, I have to say my favorite research method is diary studies, which my consultancy has been doing a lot of. And it's a whole art form of kind of crafting and setting up an effective diary study. And then, of course, as a former designer, I really love doing creative exercises with people where I can kind of give a break from the questions and the talking and tap into more kind of subconscious responses and feelings around the topic that's being explored. And so one of the things I've done in the last couple of years, because I have been really diving deeply into diary studies and they've become there's so much curiosity around them, is starting to lecture about diary studies. So there's several conferences that I've been able to present our process with, which has also been really fun. And it's been a really fun opportunity to get to know the industry better by going to these conferences. So that's a little bit about me professionally and led me where I am today. And the case study that I'm going to share with you all is kind of more in the generative foundational space. And it is around B2B office supplies. So the client is it's an innovation team at a large online retailer that had a digital space, a digital and a physical retail stores. And because they mostly sell to consumers, they were looking at creating a platform for selling office supplies directly to other businesses. And so they had done some market research that had suggested that large companies with contracted office supply vendors were really the right audience for this to focus this with, and they wanted us to help vet that. So, and what that would mean is that these companies, they had found that there's a lot of out of contract spending with these office supply companies from these contracted vendors. And that's what they were hoping to get, kind of a piece of that pie of this out of contract spending, because they offered a much more refined user experience and more playful, creative office supply. So that was kind of their initial assumption. So they scoped us for 2 cycles of research and also a workshop to embody the learnings with their stakeholders, because they had a bandwidth of time that they were going to be growing their team to prep for the next in-house deadline for them, which was kind of building a more robust prototype and a full business plan to their leadership. And that was going to be about a month after our engagement ended. So the core question that they were asking us to help them answer is, are big businesses the right audience to focus on? And so what we did for that first round of interviews is we had 2 different populations we were talking to. One was the procurement managers, and these were the people who created those office supply contracts. So we really wanted to understand how those work. And then the other piece were the administrative assistants who actually do the ordering from those office supplies. And, a lot of these are kind of antiquated, large industrial kind of systems that aren't super robust or user-friendly. So we wanted to learn about their experience. So with both audiences, we were really looking at their tasks, their context of use, and their pain points. This is really, to this day, some of the most surprising and unexpected research findings that I've ever had. And that is because what we heard from both populations was little need and little opportunity for this segment. And the assumption for the procurement managers was that once an office supply contract is in place, there would be little oversight of that out of contract spending. But what we actually heard was that even after those contracts are in place, the purchasing is carefully monitored to ensure compliance. And they even had a term, which I love, which was called rogue spenders, where they're tracking people who are consistently spending out of the network. So that was kind of one piece. And on the other side, with the administrative assistants, the assumption of the team was that the end users would be willing to break the rules and buy outside of the formal systems because they could have more products and a better user experience. And what we heard is that people were really used to the current system, and they knew that they were going to get in trouble if they went outside of it. So they didn't want to cause problems. And they also there was a lot of pride around being the person who ordered office supply. So, they were often carefully guarding that task for themselves. So no autonomy in choosing the vendor mean no opportunity to, rely on this as the major source of income for this product. So our stakeholders, came and asked, like, what should we do here? And fortunately, there had been a lot of signals in that first round of research when we talked to the administrative assistants, especially where they would talk about other jobs where they were at smaller companies where they did have the opportunity to choose the vendor. And this was actually mirrored by the procurement managers who also talked about, other other companies that they had worked at where there were not yet procurement contracts for office supplies and how much more freedom there was. So we heard really evidence of that on both audiences. So with the stakeholders who had been deeply involved in that first round of research, with their involvement, what we decided together to do was to pivot to focus on participants who were actually buying office supplies, and we had a pretty high spend, like $400 a month, that we were looking for, and to really and to include, and we also reformatted the interviews. So what we wanted to do is a remote shop along at their current office supply vendor to kind of see how they did it. And we also, because they were continuing on with their deadline of building the prototype, so they had a list of features that they were a pretty long list of features that they were considering, and they wanted us to help them figure out which ones were the most important. So did a feature prioritization exercise. So I will tell you about my favorite research moment in this set of interviews. And so I was talking to a woman who was an office manager. She managed a bunch of people, several sites, but she still held on to this task of ordering all the office supplies. And she was putting, we were doing a shop along at her current vendor, and she was looking for toilet paper. And even though when we got to that section, because she was logged into her account, there was it said, you've bought this type before. But even then, she pulled up her own desktop calculator to calculate the per sheet cost of toilet paper to make sure she was getting the best value. And that really was so symbolic of what we heard, is like the incredible pride and care that these office managers will take in order to make sure they're getting the best value for their company. And a lot of times comparison shopping is a very key part of that behavior. So that was kind of core to the findings from the second round of interviews, which is that there was a really strong opportunity. The people were having a lot of workarounds to, in all aspects of aggregating and comparing prices. And so it was a really exciting moment because the client really got clear on who they were focusing on. And we also got very, very clear details on the features that were the greatest interest to users. And so comparison shopping, so people could look at the prices from different vendors for the same item, was really one of the top ones, and got a lot of details around how important next day shipping is for no cost. And so we got a lot of really clear data so that we could get the clients, our client was able to keep working on their prototype with their feature list prioritized. And then what I began doing is preparing the data for the workshop with the stakeholders. And again, their team was getting ready to grow as they had kind of more resources to build a prototype. So what we decided to do was to kind of focus on creating two bodies of data for them to help analyze. One was a mental model of the actual tasks involved, which meant going through, as we talked with administrative assistants, about each thing that they did as they were preparing for the office supply order, and aggregating those, and then also just kind of a general values and preferences to help the team understand kind of just the thinking and the needs for the purchasing experience. So at the workshop, what we did is we had about the data about 80 or 90% analyzed, and we had them all on stickies and ordered, but we had them all go through and help reorder and come up with the labels for them, so that they really had the opportunity to dive into the data, get to know it, take ownership, and come up with some of these headers that we ended up categorizing things under. And then with the mental models, had them help sort the final round of sorting for the mental models and did the category labels. And you can kind of see in the column on the right that there was a lot of labels and tasks for the different pieces of mental models of the tasks involved. And just to give you a little bit more detail around the mental model, So here's just from one part of the compiling order. Some of the categories were planning the ordering process and scheduling, prompting around the orders, getting the requests, and then I've anonymized this data, but as you can see, each one of those is going to have several tasks, so that we've had a really, really robust list of all the things people could do. So as they're building the tool and the prototype, they could really be aware of and thinking about all the different pieces involved in ordering office supplies. And then we had a workshop. So the end of that first day, we did some ideation, pulled out the key problem areas, voted on which ones were the most interesting to move forward, and then broke into teams on day 2 and fleshed out a concept. So again, an anonymized concept that came out of this was exploring potential rewards or membership-based discount programs, because we heard such an incredible concern about saving money and how often people relied on those kinds of discounts to keep coming back to the same vendor and build that relationship. So this would offer discounts based on past spends, and it let people kind of choose their area of interest for free samples. And the idea was that whatever they were buying, that this program could help introduce them to a wider range of offerings. So that is a little bit about that project, just to kind of synopsize the outcomes from this project. So what our research helped the stakeholder do was pivot to a customer segment that's much better suited to their offerings than their first idea, to understand all the tasks that users go through while ordering office supplies for developing the prototype, identify and be very clear on which features to prioritize building, and then just, on a deeper level, transfer a really deep understanding of user behaviors to the entire team. As I mentioned, their team was growing. So this was just a really perfect moment for the whole team to come in, see all this research, and be able to take that into that. And then the really exciting news we found out after they presented this to their leadership was that they did get their concept funded for the next round and iteration. And so that was really wonderful to know that our research really helped move it forward to that point and get the confidence of their leadership to move forward with it. So so thank you for listening. And I know I've kind of went through a lot of information very quickly about all the research, and I'm very happy to answer questions about any part that you may want to know more about, or any details of the presentation that I talked about. Okay, so there's the end of that presentation. I'm going to take a minute before I move into the next one. But I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things that I want to note from that one. But I just want to invite anybody who's here live to kind of put in the chat anything that was particularly surprising, any questions you have. What did you notice that you wouldn't have thought about? Anything. So just I'll give people a minute, but I do want to just note that, one of the big things with a case study is like, how do you show impact? And so, the great thing about this case study is that, first of all, we helped them pivot. Like, that was so important that we helped them pivot. That was a really exciting thing to see. But if I hadn't had that next piece of thing, which we helped them move their funding forward, that was so exciting. And I knew that I really was like, this is going to be a great case study now, because, now I know that they got their project funded based on this research. A couple other things that I could have done is gotten a quote from my primary stakeholder at the client, or my manager, or, even a colleague, to kind of say how I contributed to this project going smoothly. So, whatever, there's so many ways to get impact. And it's fantastic to have like great signals like this, but there's other signals you can always use. And in one interview, one project, it was just like my only piece of data was that, because I knew nothing after we delivered the findings, but it was a really big project. And the designer had said to me, after the presentation, we were in the bathroom together. She's like, "Oh my gosh, you just completely unlocked my whole way of thinking about this project," and that was for that particular case study, like that was my impact, was, what the designer said to me in the bathroom. So there's talk about being creative. So, okay, let me look through the comments a little bit and just kind of answer some of the questions. Somebody asked when I would share this. So this is really for the in-person presentation. So, I would talk through this at a high level during the different, like talking to the hiring manager, talking to the HR person. I might talk at a very high level about this project. But yeah, this level of detail is going to be for the in-person presentation where I'm probably going to have, 5 or 6 people. I mean, if certainly at Google, it's going to be, most companies is going to be 5 or 6 people probably that you're going to do the presentation and then do one-on-one interviews with. So that's when I would share this level of detail. Oh yeah, I would. So here's the thing with this one about the NDA, the question about the NDA, is I felt like I really anonymized this super well already. So, and I, the thing I think about, I mean, there's so much gray area here about this. Like, we all sign the NDAs when we started companies, but like, what does that mean? What is that level of information? But if I think for me, one of the rules of thumbs, and I would talk, this is something I talk to hiring managers about repeatedly every time because it's such a big issue. So this is kind of a synopsis of my own opinion informed by all the people I've talked to is, if you're not talking to a direct competitor, then you don't have to be quite as careful. So if I was talking to a direct competitor and this actually was a live thing, I think by the time I presented this, it was like 8 months later, and that, whatever had happened with that. And I do end up knowing that it did not end up launching live. It went through the next round of funding after my research, but it did not go live as a product. So when you hear that, you're like, okay, don't have to worry about this at this point. But yeah, it's very nuanced what level of detail you can leave out. But I think with that, I mean, I'd be curious to hear what any of you think. But I did not have concerns about presenting that level of detail. I don't think anything I presented was really outside the scope of an NDA. Maybe the features, right? I think the only thing that I really present is the features. I talk about the features that we heard feedback. But again, if I'm not talking to a direct competitor that's in that space, I don't think that's much worrying about. Somebody talks about, I like seeing the photos. The photos of working in person. I know you can't fake that. Sorry. Yeah. Well, we can take screenshots of whatever kind of collaboration tools we're using. And then, sometimes you can recreate things, sometimes sometimes you have to, especially if you're a designer, you might have to recreate mocks. Definitely this needs to happen for designers a lot, where you have to leave out some key details. So, and then I also will say, I didn't say in this case, but I'll usually say at the beginning, I have anonymized this. This case study from a project that had some NDA constraints. And also when you are presenting in person, you're generally not recording. So I would say to somebody, I would appreciate, I would often say, please don't, share any details about what you're seeing. Nothing I'm showing is outside of the scope of NDA, but I also appreciate that, you're not recording, and please don't share any key details of this outside of this room. So that might be something I would say if I have any concerns. And it also just goes to show when you talk about that and address the NDA up front, you're really letting that company know that you care about that issue and you're sensitive to the NDA constraints. Okay. So yeah, somebody says, if you have a slide deck like this, does it mean you don't need to have an online portfolio? And I would say no, because, this is once you've got to the point where you're having an in-person, so to get to the point of having an in-person interview, you often need to have an online portfolio first. And so you definitely, you need all of it. And so when it comes to case studies, you think it's better to have a go-to for most interviews or a few ones that are closely aligned with certain jobs? That's a great question. As you get more senior, as you have more experience, as you have more projects, you really want to be customizing your case studies for the role that you're applying for. So absolutely, at this point, I will go like, what have I done in that space in the last 5 years? For sure. So, okay, so let me go ahead and move on to the second one. And let's see here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to have another deck because they're different sizes. So So let's go on to the next one. So yeah, I just want to invite you again to kind of see, this one I did, that first one I did, obviously, 2016. So obviously that was 8 years ago. And so just think about the difference in how I'm talking about myself, my role, with this one. And the other thing I'll say about this one before I dive in, and this one was actually an assignment. And I know this is happening a lot more in the field now where people give you an assignment. So I was applying for a consultant position at a research consultancy. And so they gave me an assignment to do. And I will just say philosophically, I have a lot of issues with being asked to do unpaid labor to interview for jobs when you have a resume and portfolios and other examples of work. But this is actually, it's a very common practice, unfortunately. And I do encourage you, if you do get asked to do an assignment that's you're going to actually put work into, is that you really make sure you understand it. You ask for clarification if you need it. And you can even ask, how many other people are being invited to do this if you're being asked for a job. So don't just give away all that labor without understanding. And if people are not going to be willing to help you kind of clarify that you really understand the scope of the project and give you the constraints of, how many other people are being interviewed for this, basically you're kind of saying, what are my odds, of getting it, then that might be a clue that they're casting a wide net and you might not have a great chances, or that they're also, there's a lot of things about that. But anyway, I did it. And so again, so this is, here I am, now with 8-10 years of experience looking to come to a consultancy, and you'll hear more about the actual framing of the project as I present this. So greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I know you've all got lots of stuff on your calendar, so I appreciate you taking the time out to attend my presentation. It's really nice to meet you. I'm Sarah Cambridge. And let me start by telling you a little bit about me. I am currently digital nomading from the Yucatan in Mexico. I've been here about a year. I'm a longtime Bay Area person. But yeah, I've been learning about living in the heat in the Yucatan. And some of the things I really love to do outside of work are biking. And here is one of my bike treks to exploring some of the really beautiful places where I'm at. This is a ceiba tree, which is a sacred tree of the Mayans, who are the native inhabitants of this area. And then also chocolate. I am all about chocolate, dark chocolate, please. Now, about my professional background, I've been a researcher for about 8 years. I've worked in-house in consulting in lots of different configurations. But really, I would say my biggest expertise is in the SaaS, or as I like to call them, collaboration tools, as I think anytime you have humans working together in a digital space, it opens so many questions. So I worked at material design with my first in-house role at Google, but I've also worked at Airtable, Figma, and done some work with Notion around this space. And then health tech, I spent my thesis project in grad school was around heart failure and using technology to help mitigate the effects of heart failure. So I'm really passionate about wellness and health tech. I worked on a diabetes coaching tool at Verily. I have some experience. I was at Patreon for a while. So you could look at it as a two-sided marketplace or a creator economy. And then early in my career, especially, I did lots and lots of consumer space and retail work with Target and Samsung and Verizon. So that's a little bit about my background. I call myself a research generalist. I really love learning new spaces, but at this point, there's something always familiar based on kind of how many years I've been in the field. So let's dive into the project that you gave me to do today. We are not going to be talking about potatoes today. And we're not just going to be talking about couches, but we're going to be talking about Couch Potatoes. So Couch Potatoes is the website of a Austin-based furniture manufacturer that you asked me to do some research around. So they have showrooms, several showrooms in Texas. They're expanding outside of Texas with showrooms out in other states. And they are primarily local. They have primarily local and in-state clients. And the brief that you gave me all that information about them, the background, and the other details you provided for me were that the had low web traffic overall, that most visitors are local, but that more non-locals are visiting. And so you wanted to know what are the needs of the non-local visitors, and then you had some concerns about not putting off the locals with any potential changes. But the core ask for this project was, how can the website be improved for non-locals? So I had interviewed one of your employees for this. So I have an N of one for this with this data, and I talked to her for about a half an hour. So all of the findings are based on this one person's feedback. And I'm going to start by telling you kind of how I broke down, looked at the data and then I'll go into all the detail, diving into each section more. So the three sections. First, we've got the shopping part. So the first piece is around the general shopping experience, and what I discovered was that the site's really busy and it has a lot of usability issues, and we heard very directly that this reduces trust and willingness to buy. And the concern of the client was they didn't want to impact negatively the local users, but my hypothesis is that this impacts all users, not just non-local users. The second piece of it, after the shopping and the browsing experience, was the purchasing. So when it comes to purchasing, that's where really critical blockers emerged. There was key details were missing around logistics, especially the delivery cost, as the person that I talked to was in Oakland, and of course the company is in Texas. So of course that's a big question if you're buying a couch to be shipped from Texas to Oakland, is how much is that going to cost me? But again, there were more usability issues that surfaced here. And then the third piece is the recommendations that I have. And in answering the very core question, does it meet the needs of non-locals? Absolutely not. They need an easier purchasing experience and more trust signals. But what I've added on here is I have 3 different levels of recommendations depending on the appetite for change that the leadership has. So let's go through these one-on-one. So first, the shopping. So the site was seen as poorly organized, very busy. And a quote from the participant was, she had pop-ups. The moment she got on that screen, there were all kinds of pop-ups coming in every few seconds. So that was frustrating. She said, all those pop-ups, things going on, all kinds of fonts, it's not very organized. They may be good at building couches, but I'm not sure I can trust them to send a couch to me in Oakland if they can't organize the website. So that is a really important signal for this company to know. And then the other thing I really want to point out is that when I was having her, the big task was, can you just find the couch collection? And she needed assistance just to find the couch collection. The site was so busy. And that was partly because the pop-ups were coming up. And she also expected there to be only couches because of the name Couch Potatoes. And as she started seeing other offerings, she just became confused, which kind of lasted for the whole duration of her time on the website. So here's some of the key usability issues that surfaced for a little bit more detail. So first of all, you can see that there's these pop-ups, the chat, the, offer for free swatches came up, and she said, this is a lot of movement I didn't ask for. We've got on this page alone, I counted 10 separate design elements and 5 typefaces. So when she said the website's very busy, I think we can all understand that. And then what I kept trying to direct her to was to look for, can you find the collection of couches? And she was scrolling up and down. And, when I finally brought her back here, which says, the most prominent everything we make, she said, oh, I was looking for a link to the online shop. So she did not see that as the link to the online shop. And then at the very top in the navigation, she did look in the top navigation too, and the couch collection is under Made in Austin. So that was not a very clear demarcation for where to find the couch collection. So there are some of the key issues here. And then to move on to the purchasing experience. So we found that non-locals need clarity around the delivery logistics, especially the shipping cost. And at this point, you have to put the couch into the cart and go through the checkout process and put your address in to get the shipping cost. So that's a very, very far way down the purchasing route for somebody to be finding out a key part of the cost. And then one of the other things is that the return policy was not clearly stated. They expected a no questions return policy. There were more organization and usability issues. And then the quote that she had after going through this was that I would not be super comfortable to buy from them because it's a really small place. Usually that means no customer support and a lot of work on my end if I need to return something. So honestly, not very likely. So not great news from this non-local person. And let me show you the details from, this is from just that column on the very right in the cart with all the details. So here alone, so we're looking at kind of, you can see the first header is under, and I've got this kind of caret open under shipping and returns. And then you've got local pickup and delivery in this graphic in a very playful font. And then you've got local and nationwide delivery, even larger underneath that. So as you can see, there's just a real, there's so much different, you know, a lot of confusion here, very messy, it feels unorganized. And the language is inconsistent. So, and when it comes to the out-of-state delivery, I've mentioned that isn't clear. So it says shipping costs will be determined at the time of purchase, depending on the state. So that was really disappointing and really provoked fear from her of what she would find as I prompted her to go through that process. It talks about white glove delivery not being available. She doesn't even describe what it is. Of course, everybody wants it when they hear the word white glove. That was never really clarified. And then it says return shipping is the responsibility of the customer and subject to the prices, but it doesn't have any more details. And she was expecting a no questions asked return policy without having to pay for it. So that's kind of the first piece. And then the second piece of the usability issues is that underneath that part, you've got all these details about the pickup that, of course, are not relevant to somebody who's ordering for online delivery. So again, she said, I said before, this is disorganized. Here again, it tells me about delivery when I'm looking, pickup when I'm looking for delivery. And at the very bottom, some bold letters, there's no public bathrooms. And then another kind of detail I want to point out about this purchasing screen is that there's a category for videos. It's not very clearly labeled. What it does offer when the data is in there, and it wasn't in this case, but I checked and there are other couches where it's a video of someone sitting in the couch, so you can see how cushy it is. And this is something she actually wanted to see. She's like, I want to kind of see how comfortable and how deep and cushy it is, but it wasn't clearly labeled and it actually wasn't in there for this case. So moving on to the recommendations, you've heard the findings. The recommendations are that non-locals do need an easier purchasing experience and more test signals. And I've broken the recommendations into 3 categories: critical blockers, immediate tactical fixes, and then deeper strategic opportunities. And they kind of move from tactical to strategic. And the quote I have here is, strategy without tactics is the slow route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So let's kind of talk through each of these. So the critical blockers are just that checkout process would be the lowest hanging fruit, clearly explaining that out-of-state shipping process, cost, and the return policy. But moving into the more immediate, if there was kind of an opportunity to do deeper fixes, we really need to have the findability and design consistency improve throughout the website. And I just want to reiterate that I am absolutely certain that more research would reveal this is not just affecting the non-local people, but also local people. And then finally, in the purchasing part, just to make that more robust, to add those videos and also provide complementary product suggestions is something that she said would be really meaningful for her. And then finally, that third piece is for the really deeper strategic opportunity. This would assume that increasing online sales is a priority for the company, and that would involve a site redesign, including updating the information architecture to improve findability, and even considering rebranding the company to better reflect the product suggestion collection. Because as I said, she just got very confused when she was finding that it's a full service furniture company when the name is Couch Potatoes. So the decision point here, and I don't know what the appetite for the stakeholders is, but would the stakeholders be open to exploring that and committing to increasing online sales? So this extra kind of part of the presentation is if the answer to this is yes. So this is what I would recommend. So the first thing is looking at other existing data signals around to glean more information about what's happening in the customer purchasing journeys. How are people shopping? Where are they stuck? Or where are they doing in store versus online for their research? Who else are they talking to? And then a client workshop to kind of bring all this information to the clients and help them give them space to kind of hash out where their priorities are. And then finally, if this was to move forward, is to talk with the key user groups to better understand their needs and preferences. So I've got a little bit more data on each of these for the data mining. Again, this is data that should be existing on the website, sales traffic, even talking to the people and in the salespeople that are working in the showrooms would have a lot of information about where buyers are, kind of how much they're going online versus coming into the store. A lot of anecdotal information probably exists. So this would just be about collecting and aggregating to see if we can fill in some of these questions to better understand the signals that exist. So, and kind of what are some of the initial questions I came up with that could look at are kind of what % of all couch potato purchases are from local versus non-locals. You could look at that, find that from the addresses. How many of the purchases are made online versus in store? You've got to imagine that some of the people who are local are making the purchases online. It is possible. And how many of them may include a brick and mortar store visit. That would maybe be something you'd get from talking to the sales reps and hearing kind of their anecdotal stories, and how many visits are made to the website before purchasing, and what even devices are they using. So all this would help kind of create a more robust picture. And then for the research, for the next step of research, what I would imagine based on what I know now is to really prioritize talking to people who maybe in the last 6 months have purchased a couch or are currently in a couch purchasing journey themselves, and really, talking to enough people to create a journey map and understanding who, where are they looking, who are they talking to, at what point are they doing different things. We can understand kind of all the actions for people who have completed a couch purchase recently, kind of understand all the things that they did leading to that purchase, and have them also walk through the current website, talking through their recent experiencing, what works and what doesn't, what their questions are. And then also to create some conceptual mocks of which don't have to be based on actual, you don't know where the design's going, but just create some conceptual mocks that you can get some feedback on, which is always very helpful when kind of facing a big redesign. So just to kind of aggregate what I've just shared with you and reiterate the answers. So the big questions that was asked in this research were, what are the needs of the non-locals? And the answer is they need an easier purchasing experience and more trust signals. And how can the website be improved for non-locals? And I provided several levels of changes depending on how high priority it is to grow online sales. And then next steps would be, before any changes are made, if there's any bandwidth, more research would absolutely be key to better understanding the patterns and uncovering the patterns of needs and different user groups. So that is the presentation. Thank you so much for your time. I know I've kind of created a high-level view of this whole thing, and I'm happy to answer questions if you want any more details on the vision for any part of this. So, okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing. All right. I know we're right at about an hour, but I just want to invite everybody who's here in person to post any comments or questions you have about the second case study. And let me start looking through the comments. Oh, I did want to note, of course, for a presentation where you're creating an assignment, like that, obviously you're not going to have impact because it's, you're doing a test project. But one thing I did want to say about this project is that I actually really had quite a bit of fun, which you might be able to tell, working on this. And I was looking for work, so it just felt really fun in the end to have something to work on. But what I realized, I got so excited about kind of creating this next level vision that I kind of like had to come back to, I kind of forgot to answer that core question of like, does this website meet the need? And so I gave this presentation to a friend of mine a few days before the actual interview presentation. And she asked to see, she's like, well, can I see the actual scope and what they asked you of? And when I was showing it to her, I was like, oh, I think I got kind of so excited about the extra piece I was delivering that I kind of forgot to make sure that I really answered that question. And I think this is really common. So I just want to say, if you're asked to do work, make sure no matter what else you add on to that presentation, you at least answer their really core question, because that is, I think, a very easy opportunity to kind of dismiss your contributions if you don't really answer that core question. Okay, so that's my little story about that one. Let's kind of go back to the chat and see what people are asking. Okay, yeah. Yeah, how do you address it if you don't have a great outcome or result to show for your work? And yeah, I mean, and well, the story that somebody's telling in the webs in the chat is like, the client decided to sunset it before the designs could go to market, and that is just $1 million question. And I think, where something like that, you've got to tell the story. I mean, the story is like, we were really excited about this. We were moving forward. We got great feedback, and that happens all the time. So you can be honest about this happened, but you can also address, these are the signals that I would have wanted to look for, to keep this moving forward. If it died before for no reason of your findings or your design work, you can certainly hypothesize what you would have liked to have happened. And you can, again, as I said before, get a quote from a stakeholder that showed that your work was useful and really moved the product forward. And oftentimes, even if that project dies for some other reason that's not related, you might realize, this happens a lot with research, you've strategically influenced something coming down the pipeline, so if as a researcher, if you're like, even though that project didn't land, I'd help deliver a much deeper understanding about this part of the project or this part of the client where clients are struggling with their product in a way that people didn't know. And I've also had projects that, the research findings, it was slated for a couple rounds of research, and the research findings showed that the initial strategy was not the right one. So, I have case studies where it's like, success on this project was that we learned that they were not going down the right road. And so we re-pivoted the resources, and they realized where they needed to do the work. That would be absolutely successful in my book as a researcher. So Susan says, great to see what a take-home assignment would look like. You really went beyond what they asked for with further research and different levels of recommendations in terms of tactics and strategy. And I'll just say, part of that was because, like, I'm really senior and I don't want to be doing, my thing is like, I don't want to be doing like super basic usability stuff. And I really wanted to show them that I'm a strategic thinker. So I was like, well, let me put that in there. That's kind of my favorite stuff to do. And I will also say I got very, very positive feedback on that case study. So they were really very impressed with it. So it was just really fun. It was a good ego boost for me, right? The job search is so demoralizing for us. And anytime you get any kind of positive feedback, that felt really good. Judy asked, this isn't related to your case studies, but I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on a PhD and how much of your studies was directly informing or impacting your work experience. I actually don't have a PhD. I got a master's degree. And my master's degree was very much a professional program. So it was really geared to get us out into the workforce quickly. My heart goes out to people with the very, very deep research skills that, often in the research practices that happen with your PhD program. But I'll say a lot of leaders in the field, a lot of people in the field, of course, especially for research, are PhDs. And, I just think you, as a PhD, to work in industry, you really have the appetite to move a lot faster. That's just a really different kind of research, as I think anybody with a PhD sees. And it's just, if you are really a detailed person and you need, you really love that clarity and you love to dive in the details, the industry probably isn't going to be a good fit for you. And so that's an issue. So anyway, I know we're right at an hour, so I will stay on if people have questions. And but I thank every single person who came in person. I think I'll probably stop the recording in a minute, so anybody who's left on the call, we can just kind of chat. Because really the whole point of this was just to kind of present my case studies and give a resource for people to see how case studies are. Just one final thought. I just want to make sure everybody knows, like, these are just, my personality, my case studies, my projects, and everybody's is going to be different. So again, my hope is just that whatever you saw, that you found something to kind of address your kind of your challenges a little bit more. So yeah, I'm going to stop the recording, but I will stay on in case people want to keep chatting, but obviously feel free to pull off if you have to.